Kate, do we have everyone or should we wait a minute?
We are missing 2 people. So if we could give them, they're both probably just getting settled at their spot. And I'm actually not going to stay on the call, Amanda, but I just wanted to say hello and, you know, just kind of give it that send off. This long awaited, wonderful send off.
Great. Perfect. I will send you a link to the recording in case you need it.
I would love to have them all as they move forward.
Perfect. Sounds great.
Here comes one of our ladies.
Amy is about ready to get on.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, I might go ahead and get started, and we're just going to do a few minutes of orientation before I turn it over to Emily for the actual training. So hopefully the final person can just join us when they're able. So hi everyone, welcome. My name's Amanda, and I'm not going to go too much into introductions because as a part of the training, Emily will be doing introductions as a tool as part of her training. So I'm with OSU. I'm an event manager, and I got looped in with CARDV and Kate to kind of help facilitate this program. We have a lot of good things moving forward. But to kick us off, I think I will just briefly go into what the program will look like. Basically, we wanted to create this by women, for women, tailored specifically to CARDV's needs. And we're also going to be using this as a pilot program, hopefully to offer a leadership community development program for women in Lynn and Benton counties for the future. And I do apologize, I usually don't have my kids on Tuesdays, but we have an in-person retreat this week, and so I needed to switch childcare days. So I do apologize for any noise you may hear. But basically, we will have 10 detailed training workshops that are, again, customized to CARDV. Some networking sessions, journaling prompts, connection to resources, and more. And this will be occurring from April through December. We will have curriculum brought in by outside organizations as well, like Basic Rights Oregon, Trauma Informed Oregon, and the Attaway Group. And then also this is sort of customizable as you need it. So if you ever need to reach out because you realize you have a project going on or a problem, I can certainly facilitate connection to resources, connections to mentors. If you want some training in peer coaching, if you need a one-on-one, anything like that. So kind of how the program will work is in April, we will have this facilitating efficient meetings, and then and I apologize, the date is still to be determined, but it'll be in the outline dates and times that Kate provided, so it will work for your schedule. Confidently and effectively communicating and providing feedback. May through August, I know we have to take a break. I apologize, 1 second.
So I'll just fill in that we're taking a break because Heather will be gone. And I'll take this opportunity just to say, Emily, thank you, Emily, Henry, thank you so much for working with us. I just am so excited to have the opportunity to bring this kind of training program to our team. Some of the segments will be the trainer team that you see before you. These are our trainers / managers. And there will be other programs that we will increase our numbers significantly to open up to a number of our staff as well. So and Emily, I'm the executive director of CARDV, and these fabulous members are wonderful team members that I work with every single day. I'm going to say I do, but before I do, Amanda, it's been a long, interesting road, but we are here, and congratulations. And thank you so much for everything that you've done to make this actually happen for us. So I will see all you other ladies soon, and I'll get out of your hair. Bye.
Thanks. Great to meet you.
Thank you, Kate.
Yep.
Sounds great. And as Kate mentioned, because of the break, during that break, we want to keep the momentum going. And so I will be providing 2 journaling prompts per month, 1 leadership podcast recommendation, and then again, that ongoing support as needed by anyone at CARDV or anyone in this program. And then in August through December, we'll resume our 2 trainings per month. And those will consist of increasing equity in the workplace, effective and impactful leadership, navigating power dynamics and conflict management, supporting LGBTQIA+ team and community members from Basic Rights Oregon, trauma-informed care from Trauma-Informed Oregon, cultural competency training, whiteness at work from the Attaway Group, and then we'll do a graduation and certification from OSU. And so those are just some core components of the program. And what I will be doing is sending out all of this information to you, but I also have made a website that's beav.es/women leaders. And that is where I will be putting reminders about the program, training dates, Zoom links, recordings, upcoming information and things like that. So if you ever need to consult that or want to revisit a recording or whatnot, you will be able to access all of those. I think that'll be especially helpful for, I know that we have different people attending different pieces of the program. So you'll be able to access all of the trainings. And that's pretty much it. My email is on the screen. Also, Kate has it if anyone needs anything. And with that, I will just say I'm so excited to be working with all of you. I'm so excited for this pilot program and what we can turn it into for the community at a future date. And I will now turn it over to my amazing colleague, Emily Henry, who is our assistant program leader.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for being here today. I'm super excited to chat with you all about facilitating meetings. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So as Amanda said, I'm Emily Henry. I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to be talking about facilitating meetings today with you all. So I wanted to give you a little overview of what I hope to talk about today. And really my overall goal here is that hopefully you all will leave with some tips and tools and strategies for preparing for and facilitating meetings. So I'm hoping this will be a good kind of working training and that you'll leave with great resources. I would like us to start with introductions, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I'd love to get to know you all a bit better. And then I would like to hear from you all, kind of what you all think about what makes a meeting good and bad. I'm hoping that'll help guide us today. Something else that I would like to guide us is this idea of inclusive meetings. So really focusing on this whole time with everything we think about, all the tools and tips and strategies, is how we can be as inclusive as possible, no matter what the meeting is, if it's one-on-one, a large group, really focusing on that inclusivity. And then the last 2 pieces are sort of the hands-on practical piece of things, like how are you preparing to facilitate and how are you actually doing the facilitation? And so that will be kind of our overview for today. And so introductions. So you'll probably notice throughout, and I'll kind of highlight where I can, but I'll use sort of a variety of facilitation strategies that certainly we're obviously in virtual, but some of them I think could be helpful for in-person meetings too. So you may just make note if there's anything that you think works better than others or strategies you might want to use for facilitating. The introductions will be one of those. So what I would like to do is share names, pronouns, if you're comfortable sharing, and then if you wouldn't mind sharing what type of meeting you most often facilitate, you know, whether it's one-on-one, groups, internal, external, however you want to kind of describe that, just to kind of give me a sense of what you all are doing now. because I will be asking throughout for a fair amount of feedback and thoughts from you all as well, and kind of strategies for facilitating. And then the style I'd like to use is kind of a popcorn style. So I can model this. I'll go first, but hopefully each of us can invite the next person after we introduce ourselves, invite the next person to introduce themselves, and on and on. So I will start, as I said, my name is Emily Henry. My pronouns are she, her. And the types of meetings I most often facilitate at this point in my career are really internal with our open campus team. So probably 15 to 20 of us typically. A fair amount of them are virtual, sometimes in person, but that tends to be where my focus is in terms of facilitation. So I will hand it over to Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica. My pronouns are she, her. Right now, I'm not heavy on meetings, but I'm used to doing like more internal meetings, and I expect that to be my involvement more so soon. And we'll go with Heather.
My name is Heather Gibbons. I use she, her pronouns, and I facilitate internal meetings, lots of one-on-one in person with the people I manage, and some like full group meetings with our full staff, which has been on Zoom, but we're kind of transitioning to returning to in person. So kind of managing that transition is going to be interesting, I imagine, for me, because I've always facilitated in the Zoom world, not in person, so for big groups. And Nuria.
Hi, I'm Nadia Amara. I use she, her pronouns. So I mainly also do a lot of internal meetings. I do one-on-ones. We do our team meetings as a larger group. I attend other meetings externally, but yeah. And also mostly over Zoom like Heather. So. I will choose Kristen next.
Hello, my name is Kristen Dewey. My pronouns are she, her. I facilitate like statewide task force meetings or like coalition, multidisciplinary team, community partner type meetings, both in person and on Zoom. And then I also have experience facilitating support groups for survivors. So small group in-person meetings. And I will call on Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy. Sorry, I was having a little trouble with the mute button. So my name is Amy and I use she, hers. And I do some like one-on-one meeting, but not really. But I am going to be doing the sexual assault support group. So I'm excited about that. And I'm not sure if we were supposed to talk about like things that we expected in the meeting yet, or if you were waiting for that.
You're certainly welcome to share. Yeah, that would be great.
I was hoping that we could like discuss active listening.
Thank you for sharing that. That is not something that will appear on my slides, but I think that will come up in some of the facilitation pieces. So remind me if I don't specifically bring that up, but I'm making a note now. So perfect. I think that was everybody. Is that right? Okay, thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing and for sharing kind of your experience with meetings. I think I have kind of hopefully run the gamut on different kinds of meetings talking about facilitation. So I think it should cover everything that you all mentioned. All right, so the next thing, and I can put this in the chat as well, is we're going to use Menti if you've used that before to do a little survey of the group. Perfect. So the idea here is we're going to focus on what makes meetings bad and what makes them good. We will start with the negative side of things first. So let me open up Menti and I can put that code in the chat too. Sometimes it's easier just to copy and paste it in. You can do this from a phone or browser if you haven't done it before. There's the code and Menti.com should get you there. And then we'll start with the bad meeting side of things. So if you just want to share anything, and you should be able to put in more than one of things that for you make a meeting not so great. Yeah, no agenda or structure for sure. Too long. Yep. Unorganized, yep. Monotone, especially on Zoom, that one can be painful. Yep. Interrupting for sure, talking over other folks. Yes. We do have a few small breakouts, so sorry to that person that said that, but we'll hopefully they will feel productive. Yeah, too sidetracked, yeah, off topic for sure. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you for those. Yeah, things that could be an email for sure. Yeah, meetings that don't feel necessary are not great. Well, feel free to keep adding to this too. I can share this out afterwards. I think there's a way I can share it out so you can see the feedback from it. But we will go on to the next one, and what makes a meeting good. Well, let's see. I've got to move around on my. Okay. Next question is what makes the meeting good for you all? Some of it, I guess, is probably the opposite of some of those, but if there's anything else there to share, concise. Smiles, nice. Variety, that's good. Yeah, for sure. Interactive has a purpose. New concepts, yeah. Supportive, organized, perfect. Those are all, this is all going to fit super well with the things we're going to talk about today. So this is great to see. Yeah, structured, short, accomplishing a clear goal. Next steps for sure. Thank you all for sharing those. That's going to be super helpful today. And I think it ties in really well with the next pieces that we'll talk about. I'm going to share some research as well that really fits exactly with the things that you all just shared about good and bad meetings. So meetings that are done poorly, that don't have a clear goal, just like you all said, are often seen as a distraction. Why isn't this an email? This is taking away from real work time. And even 70% of managers in this one survey said they think a lot of meetings are unproductive, inefficient. So even the manager level are saying those kinds of things. And then, you know, even worse, people can feel excluded or unheard, especially those folks who have historically been excluded and unheard if meetings are run poorly. And so the data, again, we have just a little tidbit here, but thinking about virtual meetings in this one survey, almost half of women that were surveyed said it was difficult to speak up in virtual meetings. And then 20% of them, 1 in 5, said they felt completely ignored in virtual meetings. So there's definitely a lot of ways meetings can be bad. But good news is that not all meetings have to be that way, of course. So for the women piece of things, women said that 40% of women said they feel more included in meetings if they are just asked a direct question or asked to contribute. So there's strategies around making meetings better, certainly. And even though 70% of managers said meetings can be pretty inefficient and ineffective, 70% of people also said that they're a lot more excited about meetings that are well planned, to the point, all the things you all said, right? Organized, if these meetings are well planned, that they are not against meetings. So meetings don't have to be bad, which is good. Something else I wanted to talk about a bit is adult learning, which I think came up in a lot of the things that you all talked about as well. So these are some kind of keys. If you've heard of pedagogy before, that's kind of the child learning side of things. Andragogy is like the adult learning side of things that I feel like gets talked about a little bit less. I'm not an expert in it by any means, but I feel like some of these pieces are pretty interesting to think about when you think about meetings. So I just have a few pieces highlighted here, and then I do have some links I'll share afterwards that have more about adult learning if you're interested in that. But some things that adults really want is that we want to know why. We want to know why we're being asked to be at this meeting, why we're learning something, why we're doing something, how is this benefiting us? And so you all can type into the chat or raise hands if you want to, but how do you think this might relate when you're facilitating a meeting? This folks wanting to know the why. Fear of unknown. That's a good one. Yep. Not knowing why they're coming to a meeting. Yeah. Yeah. Can guide how somebody interacts. Yeah. And another thing you all mentioned in good meetings was having kind of a clear focus or a goal, being organized around things. I would say that too. Like people, both because of that fear of the unknown, right? A lot of people, you don't want a meeting from your supervisor that says meet with me that has no context or whatever, right? Like those can be kind of daunting. So it's good to know the context so you can prepare yourself if there's any sort of anxiety. And then it's also nice to know like why you're there, why this isn't just an email, this should have a point, right? So I think knowing the why is something good to keep in mind. The second piece is that adults come with experience, right? So we have a variety of life experience, personal, professional experience. And we should think about that when we're planning a meeting and how you can really utilize your attendees' experiences to meet your goals and really honor that we all are coming in with different experiences and making that a part of your facilitation strategy. And then finally, another one I thought was really tied to our meeting facilitation ideas is that we as adults are really driven by solving real world problems. So we want to have knowledge and skills and topics that can help us solve problems. We want this like real world connection. And so how could you see that relating to facilitating meetings? Again, you can call out or type in the chat. Yep, how will this help me do my job better? For sure. Yeah, if you're gonna have to learn something new. Another good reason to make the goals of the meeting clear. Something else that came to mind for me is having something engaging in the meeting, right? Which is something you all highlighted as well of having a meeting that has some activity or engagement to it, so people are getting these real skills and seeing how it relates to a real problem. Having people work through things with you in a meeting, I think, could be another way to get at this. So on to inclusive meetings. So some of this is also going to tie in really well with what you all highlighted, and good meetings are the opposite of the bad meetings and making them less inclusive. And so this is something I think is good to focus on no matter what kind of meeting you're having, and just keeping this front of mind. So these are just 6 tips, but I would love to hear if you all have some other tips. This is obviously not the be all end all, but just a few things to kind of think about. So the first tip is making the space welcoming and safe, making time to share names and pronouns as you can. I know meetings really vary in size, but just making some space for that, even if it's sharing with neighbors or sharing with the table, of kind of putting the people first. The second tip is making accessibility a goal for every meeting, virtual or in person. So that's something that we are really intentional about at OSU, of putting that on any of our materials that we send out. Sort of asking for any accommodations folks might need, but just thinking about that and all the ways that you can, right? If you can record the meeting and make it available afterwards, that might make it more accessible for folks who can't be there or who would like to watch again and kind of process the meeting that way. In person, of course, there's a ton of different things to think about, but even is there parking available can be a big one when we ask people to meet on campus, for instance. That is not very accessible, but thinking about, is the space accessible physically, and are you putting in breaks into meetings and that kind of thing. The third tip is being thoughtful about dates and times of meetings. So who would be excluded if you had it during the day versus the evening? If you have it in the evening, is there a way to provide food or childcare potentially? The fourth tip is allowing for multiple ways for folks to respond and engage during the meeting. And so people, process information, share out information in a lot of different ways. And so just making as many ways as possible. And we'll talk about different strategies and use different strategies today, but things like typing in the chat versus talking out into the group, having smaller group discussions versus larger group discussions, letting people take some time to jot down thoughts and a little quiet time. As much of those as you can do, there's no one strategy that's best for everybody, but if you make space for different strategies, that can be really helpful for everyone in the meeting. The fifth tip is checking in with meeting participants throughout. So just kind of gauging in any way that you want to of how the meeting's kind of going, and just, even just reading the room and seeing, are people still engaged, are they paying attention? Any way that you want to do that to kind of make sure that things are staying on track. And then the final tip on this list is ensuring all voices are heard. And so tip 4, I think, is a big way to do that, is how you are letting people engage and how you're facilitating. But there are other techniques too, right? So the one before in the data where women said, like, if someone directly asks me a question or, asks my opinion, that can be an easier way for me to engage in virtual meetings where sometimes it's hard to jump in. You can't really have like a side convo or talk to anybody very easily. Another technique that I liked was amplification. So this is something that kind of came out during when Obama was in the White House. So his staff was about 1/3 women and 2/3 men. And so the women felt like they were having a hard time getting into meetings, having a hard time being heard in meetings, having a hard time like getting their ideas out there. And so they sort of banded together and said, like, we're going to do this amplification. So if you say something, Heather, and the group has kind of passed it by, that, I will jump in and say, hey, I think Heather's idea was great. She said this program was a really good idea, and here's why I think the same thing. Basically amplifying that person's voice and giving that person credit. So that could be a way as a facilitator that you could ensure people's voices are being heard, especially if you have somebody that's kind of a disruptor or talking over other folks, as we mentioned in the bad meetings. Do you all have any other tips that you would add to this list that I might be missing for thinking about keeping meetings really inclusive?
I think with the allowing for multiple ways to respond, that makes me think of like using Menti, or like using ways for anonymous feedback in addition to like in-person, like actual face-to-face talking, speaking up, if people aren't feeling comfortable to say whatever for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Of having it so it's not your name attached to it necessarily. That's a great note. Any other thoughts? We'll keep this theme running too. So if there are things that come up or ways that are really specific to meetings that you're working on that you would like thoughts on how to make them more inclusive, that'd be a great thing for us to talk about as a group and brainstorm too. So feel free, we'll be talking about meetings the whole time. So, all right. So checking back in with the agenda. So we've kind of had the background piece of things, gotten to know each other. Why are meetings good and bad? How can we be more inclusive? And so the rest of today is really going to be focused on preparing for the meeting and conducting the meeting. So really a lot more getting into the weeds of facilitating. So preparing, I would say the thing I think is most important, and it doesn't matter if this is a one-on-one meeting, if it's a huge group, statewide, just internal, external, all of the above, is this meeting should have a goal, right? So that was something that came up of like, why isn't this an email? Why are we having this meeting? No one, or anxiety or fear around having the meeting, like that should not be something that we come into any meeting with. And we certainly don't want any of our participants to come in with. So this would be number one. Why are we having this as a meeting instead of an email, for instance? So is there a decision that needs to be made? Is there a takeaway or something to learn? What is the overall goal? And so if we don't mind taking just a moment in the chat, if you wouldn't mind sharing, and it can be pretty general, but some goals of meetings that you've been to recently, it might help us kind of think about this as we continue to talk about goals and do some of our meeting planning. Voting, sharing information. I'll share one of ours was learning technology for our team. Perfect. Debriefing, yeah, just sharing out information, yeah. Oh, ensuring needs are being met, check in and progress, yep. Solutions, yep, updating, for sure. Those are all great. Well, those will be good for us to keep in mind as we continue to kind of think about this process of preparing and conducting and sticking kind of everything going back to that goal, right? The next thing I would really think about when preparing is who is involved in the meeting, right? So we know we're talking a lot about facilitation today. So obviously somebody is facilitating this meeting, but what are some of the other key roles? So in this case, we're able to record the meeting, which is great. But if it's in person, or even sometimes if you're recording and you don't know if people are really going to go back and watch the whole thing again, just having somebody to take notes, especially for to-dos or follow-up items or that sort of thing is very important. And then the technology piece. So whether it's in person or on Zoom, usually there's some technology needs. Amanda's going to be helping me with some breakout rooms and putting files in the chat. And but there also could be other things too, right? If you're in person, maybe somebody needs to bring Post-it notes for an exercise or figure out the food, or just who's managing all of those things, because it may or may not be the facilitator. The attendee piece of things is complicated, I think, sometimes, because you want to be as inclusive as possible and make sure the right people are there, but you also don't want to invite people that are like, oh my God, why am I at this meeting? So that I feel like can be some trial and error of who needs to be there and why. But it's good to remember that meetings take time and energy. And so thinking about who makes most sense to be in the room and being intentional about that. I have an example here that might be a little more applied to the work that Amanda and I are in, but for example, if you have a meeting where you're trying to improve a program that focuses on youth, it might be great to have one of the former youth participants come and join the meeting. Like maybe they can come and help you figure out really how to improve this program. Maybe there's certain members of your team that definitely need to be there. But for us, if we're just talking in the first stages about improving this program, we probably don't need like marketing to be there to share out information about this program, right? We're not really there yet. We want them to be informed and kept in the loop, but maybe theirs is just an email. So you can say like, hey, we're reimagining this program. There's gonna be more information coming soon, but they might not need to be at like program planning meetings. So I think it's just an art of figuring out who needs to be there and who doesn't, but you know, trying to be as inclusive as possible with not having people wonder why they're at this meeting is a good way to kind of balance it. And then I have a note here too. This may be the note taker or the facilitator or somebody else, but thinking about follow-up details, to-dos after the meeting, who's going to be sharing that out. Is something good to plan at the beginning, so that way you know at the end who's sharing out the notes, who's sharing out follow-up, who's doing that piece of the wrap-up. So building an agenda is the next item on my list in preparing. So much like I think every meeting should have a goal, I feel like every meeting should have an agenda. And so I know with one-on-one meetings, you're not going to be developing like a full agenda, but you probably should have at least a full few like bullet points of how you're going to get to that goal or what you want to talk about. Like, again, there's a reason this is a meeting. So what's your way of getting to your ultimate goal? And for larger meetings, you probably need a more formal agenda. So things I would include on an agenda obviously depends on the meeting, but if we're going to focus a little bit more on like a formal kind of, bigger meeting agenda, I would say the main topics and points of discussion should be there. As a facilitator, having your plan. So how much time are you going to spend on each topic? Who's in charge of leading the different topics? Just because you're the facilitator, right? You might not be in charge of each piece. What is your plan for doing the facilitation? So you may even want to be pretty specific about, well, in this piece, I'll use breakout rooms, or this piece, in an in-person meeting, we're going to use Post-it notes and make notes around the room for 10 minutes for, strategic planning, or just thinking about how you're actually going to get through each of the topics and facilitate them. And then just basic meeting details. So location of the meeting, when's it happening, where is it happening, what are the different roles? It might be good to just spell those out of who's facilitating, who's taking notes, who's doing technology, just having all of that documented. And so I have an example to share. And I will have, Amanda, if you don't mind, I know you shared this file in the chat before. Can people see that? I never know if people can see things if it's there before they come in or not. So thank you. That. Okay. So here's an example one that I sort of made up a little bit based on looking at your all's website. So this is a quarterly staff meeting that I've created. That's a 2-hour meeting in June. And the goal of this meeting is to share out, kind of like you were saying, sharing out sort of updates and getting everybody on the same page of what's happening in each area. and then also developing a plan for priorities, programs, and activities for the next 6 months in our fake meeting here. And so you can see kind of some of the basics up here in terms of location, where is it, when is it, what are the roles. So that's just kind of the general gist here. But here's where I really break things down quite a bit more in terms of the agenda items, who's in charge of them, how am I doing this, and what time is dedicated to each of these things. So you know you have 2 hours total. 2 hours is pretty long. We should probably have a break. We usually, we're going to have some kind of introduction and welcome. We're going to have some kind of wrap up. That's where I usually start, right? It's sort of the structure and the skeleton of the meeting. Is there anything that you all notice on here or any questions that you have of kind of how this has been laid out? Or anything that stands out to you?
We do like a weekly meeting that can be up to 3 hours, and I'm just thinking of how, and we don't do an agenda at this time. We like take notes and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking how we could adapt this to kind of our weekly meeting, which generally is like updates on stuff we're doing, or agency updates on like things we need to do. So that's where I'm at. I don't have a specific question out of that, but I just figured I'd provide some context.
No, that's super helpful to know. Yeah, a 3 hour meeting without an agenda probably is a little tough, I would think. Yeah, one thing we've done for different, depending on whether it's reporting out or how people are sharing, sometimes we're really specific about, you can only have this many slides in this much time, assuming people are kind of doing a group presentation. That's something we've done to really contain reporting out and updates, because even our team has said, even we do kind of informal ones, people are like, oh, I don't know how much to report out, because I will feel like I share 2 things, then somebody else shares 10, then I feel like I'm not doing anything, but I just didn't share as much because I didn't know we were sharing that much. So sometimes even having those parameters can make people feel like less insecure about sharing out the information, right? Of like, you are only sharing out kind of this, maybe it's just high level things because you only have a few minutes for it. We've gotten that feedback before from our team of like, oh, I don't want people to feel like I'm not doing the same amount of work, but I just took less time. And yeah. So yeah, well, this is in the file that Amanda put in the chat, and we are going to be using this in an activity here in just a moment. So you'll have a copy of this and we can talk more about it, but hopefully this kind of general, pretend meeting will give you some ideas. This is definitely things that we've done in real life, a very similar layout to things. All right, so Amanda's going to help me with breakout groups. Maybe we can do 2 groups for this one. And this is a scenario to kind of start drafting up an agenda. I know it takes a while to create an agenda, so I'm not expecting a complete agenda in a few minutes because we are in limited time, but hoping this would give you some ideas to kind of start crafting it and planning out how you might design an agenda. So the scenario here is you're facilitating an in-person meeting to review the financial empowerment education curriculum and the success of the program and meeting its goals. So you have a 1 hour long meeting for this first meeting, and the people who are attending are 3 people who have been through the program, and then 7 staff or volunteers that have a varying level of knowledge about the program. And then your group that's creating the agenda, you can see yourselves as the facilitators as part of this. So the goal here is, does the curriculum need to be updated to meet the program objectives? So you're really just doing this kind of first swipe of like, how is the program working right now? Is it meeting objectives? And I would like you to work with your group to start to create an agenda using the template. So there's no right answer, a lot of ways to approach this. I know it's not going to be a complete agenda by any means, but hoping we can just kind of start thinking through the process and see if you all have questions or things you can share out of strategies you sort of have of how you might structure your hour with about 10 folks to kind of get at your goal here. So in the file that Amanda put in the chat, it has an empty template that you can use if you want to, or if you want to start modifying that example one, whatever works best for you all. Or if you want to do an agenda template that looks different than that, that's fine too. But we'll just spend a few minutes in groups kind of thinking about how we might plan out that meeting. And so maybe we will do like 7 minutes in breakout rooms, if that sounds okay, Amanda. And I'll stay in the main room. So I may not join a room, Amanda, but I can stay in the main room. And then if you all want to hop back and have any questions. Oh, looks like I have my notes.
I just put you in a room by yourself because it wouldn't let me.
You wouldn't let me like not be in one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, you just don't have to join that one.
That sounds good. Okay. Sounds good. Cool, cool. Thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. This is great so far.
Good. Okay. I was hoping so. It's so hard when you're doing it for the first time. Wait for the other group to pop back in. Great. Welcome back, everybody. So I know that was not very much time to start this activity, but what did you all think? How did it go? Did you have some ideas on how you might work through this?
I thought it was really helpful to just have a breakdown of everything, and then just fill it out. Like it just felt a lot more structured and simple.
Awesome. Good. Good. I'm glad.
I really did like using the formatting. So thank you.
Yeah, good, good. I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah, we kind of went through and thought a little bit about power dynamics and like within this scenario having like survivors and staff members in the group. So having the option for anonymous feedback if that's the kind of feedback that wants to be provided, but also like in-person verbal feedback. And then talking about a lot of ideas for improvement, the feasible changes that could be made, and like long-term goals.
Yeah, that's a great note. I like that a lot, thinking about the power dynamics there. Anything else you all wanted to share out? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for working through that and taking a go at building the agenda. So that was kind of our preparing the meeting section. The rest we'll talk about conducting the meetings. This would be a good place for us to talk about active listening too, and make sure that we get that covered. So part of that is setting the tone, and that might be a good place to sort of talk about active listening too, because I think this is really the role of the facilitator to make sure this is happening. I would say that, you know, the inclusive meetings, I think is important for everyone there to be engaged and committed to that. But I do think as the facilitator, you have sort of a special role in doing that. And so part of it is certainly setting the tone, welcoming everyone, making that space for introductions as you can. As we mentioned before, in large groups, this may just mean you're just introducing yourself to the people next to you or at the table. You know, I know sometimes if you have 30 people, you can't probably go around one by one with meeting time, but there's still time to at least, you know, get to know the people around you or you know, putting that in some way, shape, or form. Making sure everyone has the agenda and highlighting the goals of the meeting, setting ground rules and expectations. And so active listening might be a good thing to set for ground rules and expectations. Do you all have any good strategies you use right now for active listening? I know you're doing a lot of different meetings. Is there some strategies that are working for you now?
I often just take notes as part of my active listening.
I think like nodding and eye contact are ways that we use a lot within our team. And also asking like follow-up questions, or like if you didn't understand something, just following up on like what they meant, or putting your point of view in as well.
I think those are great. And I think those relate really well to facilitating, so that you can be paying a lot of attention to who is talking. You could set that as a ground rule or expectation if you're having small group discussions, when someone's talking, you know, looking at that person, you know, giving them time to speak, not saying anything until they're done talking, you know, you can give physical nods or, you know, kind of affirmation that you're hearing them, but letting them have the floor to speak. And so I think you could set that as some of your ground rules and expectations. Those are super helpful and all sound great to me.
Other thing I
Yeah.
try to do, especially in one-on-one meetings, is like minimize the distractions that are around, like turn my phones
Mhm.
over, and like close out of my email so that I'm not distracted by something popping up.
Mhm.
Which I've noticed, like when I do that, I'm like, I'm disengaging from this meeting, especially in a one-on-one meeting. It feels disrespectful to them and to our time.
Yep, that's huge. And I think that could be a good ground rule to set in a larger meeting too, is saying like, hey, let's put our phones away while we're having these discussions. And, you know, it's sometimes hard to make adults do any of that, but you can certainly suggest and see if you could, you know, encourage that behavior anyway. And I see there's some in the chat here too. Yeah, virtual meetings. Yeah, keep video on. I think so. I know there's different limits to that in terms of technology and comfort and that kind of thing, but it can be a good way if you feel comfortable doing that, of sort of setting that tone. So that way people know you are paying attention and listening when they're speaking. Yeah, nodding, clarifying questions. Yeah, well, yeah, and let's keep talking about this too as we talk about conducting the meeting. There may be more things that come to mind as well. So I wanted to think about the inclusivity piece again and being strategic about that. I have a few different kind of categories of focus that you might want to think about in this exercise, but I also am really interested in hearing who else you think in the meetings that you conduct that we may want to focus on in terms of inclusivity. So this may be, you know, I think some of these groups could be present at any meeting, but there might be folks that you work with that there's, you know, specific ways that you want to make sure that they feel included. So the idea I have here is some facilitation strategies we could use to ensure the meeting is welcoming to folks who might be more introverted, less outspoken. That could include that power dynamic too, right? Maybe they're not introverts, but they just feel like in this space that they, you know, may not feel as comfortable speaking out. So kind of thinking about those folks. Thinking about somebody new to the group. So sometimes it can be really hard if you're a new employee, or, you know, this is a group that's maybe met before and this is your first time joining and you feel like maybe you don't know as much. So thinking about how you can make sure that they're feeling welcomed and able to share. And then someone that's not from the dominant culture or language that may also feel sort of excluded or othered by the group. Those are three groups that we can think about, but I also would love to hear again, who else you think might lack full access or kind of feel excluded from meetings, and how we can think about facilitating that. So let me check my time. We're running close, so we may not do our actual breakout. I don't have much more to talk about after this, but maybe if you want to take a minute just to jot down some thoughts on each of these, and then we'll just share out together as a larger group rather than breaking out again. We'll probably take just a minute. Okay, I know that doesn't give us a ton of time, but I don't want us to run over today either. So what do you all think about the introvert and maybe the power dynamic side of things? Are there some strategies you think could be helpful there?
I know that I have a hard time. I feel like a lot of Zoom meetings are people jumping in over each other and talking. And like naturally, I just want to wait till that person's done and then start to talk. But as soon as that person's done, then someone else starts to talk. So I think as a facilitator, you know, you want to respond to what someone says, but I think also maybe give like a few seconds for someone else to respond to what that person said. Yeah, just giving that space, even though it might only take like 5 seconds.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, Zoom can be especially tough.
I think if you're facilitating a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting and someone looks like they are wanting to say something but haven't gotten a chance, like calling on them or including them in some way.
Yeah.
I think encouraging the use of chat is really helpful for introverts too. Just making sure that people know that's an option and we're checking it out.
I agree. What about someone that's new? Oh, did someone else have something? Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was going to say, making sure that things don't get too hectic or too loud if it's an in-person meeting, like setting that tone so the quiet person has a chance to actually speak up and be heard.
That's a really good point. Yes. Yeah. It can feel overwhelming, especially if you need some extra time to process. I'm one of those people that like, I need a moment sometimes to think it through. It can be hard if things are really hectic. What about somebody that's new to the group? It might be some similar strategies, but is there anything there you might do differently?
I was thinking like icebreaker questions, like something like about like maybe their favorite food or like where they've, traveled, or do they have an animal, like those types of things. I think welcome people to be, something that they're comfortable with talking about.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good idea. And I know sometimes icebreakers, if you already know the group, can be like, oh, but there are ones that feel like less daunting and I think can kind of level the playing field when you do have new folks to a group. What about somebody not from the dominant culture or language that would be joining the group?
I would say similarly, try not to keep it too hectic and just honor the fact that they might need a bit of time to translate in their head if it's not the dominant language, or make sure that there is inclusive language, and to make sure that they feel like it's a safe space to talk.
I think that's great. And that may, like you said, making sure things aren't too hectic, maybe allowing some time for some quiet processing as part of the group. I think that could help multiple people. That might be another good strategy there too. Well, thank you all so much for sharing. Okay, I will get us through the end of this. So conducting the meeting, I think we've maybe alluded to this a little bit, but certainly having a clear plan is great. So setting an agenda, having clear goals, mapping out facilitation strategies, thinking about timing, thinking about who's taking on which roles, but also realizing, much like today, you've got to be flexible because sometimes you're running out of time or you have other things that are happening, that things may be derailed a little bit by someone in the meeting is something that certainly happens commonly with like large meetings. And so being flexible and kind of working with that. And realizing that having a really great plan is good and a good way to be able to modify it when you're going forward into the actual meeting and working with real people. So we may not have too much time to talk about this, but I think these are good things to think about. Maybe this can be kind of part of some of the journaling prompts or something if Amanda's open to that. But I think thinking about facilitation strategies for some of these difficult things that can derail meetings. And so these were some of the things I think came up in the bad meeting things can be if things get really off topic. So sometimes an unplanned topic pops up. It can be something, sometimes it's just fully off topic, and it might be something as a facilitator you say like, hey, that's great. This meeting's really focused on X, Y, or Z today, but that's something that would be great for a future meeting, or you and I can talk about that after the meeting. But sometimes it is something that is important, and maybe it's really important to that person, or it is kind of important to the group and you just hadn't thought about it before. So just sort of judgment there. And that would be something to think about your facilitation strategies if that comes up, how you might approach it. Behind schedule, pretty common, various reasons to get behind your planned schedule. But what are things you can do to still end the meeting on time? So for instance, I was hoping we could meet and talk about some of these a little bit more, but we won't be able to because I want to make sure we're not holding you over too much here. Disruptive participants, these ones can be really hard. So sometimes someone who is like really talking over people, maybe they're upset or angry, or just, really, really talkative and taking up a lot of the space in the room. I would think about some strategies for dealing with that. Sometimes it's just really hard. It also can be really hard depending on who the person is. Like, is this somebody in the community that you work with a lot? Is this someone like really powerful in your organization or outside? Like for me, if our director of extension really wanted to talk about something in a meeting, I probably have to let him talk about it and plan my schedule accordingly of how I'm going to adjust things. So I know this one can be tough if you have kind of depending on who the person is or how they respond, but this would be a good one to think about and kind of prepare yourself for, especially in bigger meetings, as not unusual to have that come up. Okay. I am coming to the end and wrapping up this meeting as well, but I do think it's good to think about when you're conducting the meeting, the wrap up. We mentioned that before and we had it on the agenda, but you can do some of this during the meeting and then some of it will come afterwards. So make sure you leave some time at the end of the meeting for any next steps. Are there takeaways that people need? Are there to-do items that you need to follow up on? Do you want to go ahead and schedule the next meeting? If it's a smaller group, it might be good to just say, hey, can people meet in 3 weeks on Monday? Let's go ahead and put it on our calendars instead of having to do email back and forth. You can also ask for feedback on how the meeting went. If it's that kind of meeting where you'd feel comfortable asking folks of like, hey, did this get what you needed? Was this training what you'd hoped for? And then after the meeting, thinking about with those roles of who's sending out notes, who's sending out to-dos, who's scheduling future meetings if there are any, who's following up to make sure things are happening, that people are getting what they needed, or that if folks are completing something maybe before the next meeting, who's checking to make sure that's done. Also a good time with your facilitation or maybe smaller team to think about how the meeting went, if there's things you would change in the future. And so just making space for this wrap up time. Okay, with that, I am wrapping up. So here's my email address. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions or anything. I'm happy to answer any questions now. I know we're like just a few minutes over, so if you have to go, please do. But if you have any questions or anything else you want to talk about, I'm happy to stick around for a few as well. Thank you all so much for being so great today too.
Thank you so
much,
much.
Emily.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you.
Heather, did you have something you wanted to say? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just saying thanks.
Awesome. I have Emily's contact info if anyone has some specific facilitating meetings questions that come up, and especially after the journaling prompts that I will send out. Feel free to reach out to me or directly to Emily if you jotted down her email address. And I will be posting, I'll send them out via Kate, but I will also be posting on that website, the journaling prompts, Emily's slides, and the templates, and also the recording as soon as it's done. So with that, I will let everyone have the rest of their Tuesday, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day.